Okay, I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting of the Willoughby-Eastlake City Schools Board of Education on June 8th, 2020. It is now 7:01. Mr. Parkins, will you call the roll?
Dr. Beal?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Merhart?
Here.
Mr. Roscoe?
Here.
Mrs. Ern?
Here.
Great. If you'd all like to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. The first item for the board tonight is a resolution of the board to temporarily amend the public participation policy so that we can use our phone system to get some public participation. That would be item 1D. Do I hear a motion to pass that resolution? Mr. Jones?
I motion to approve item 1D, resolution of the board temporarily amending its public participation policy.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I will
Roscoe?
make a motion to, or second that motion.
Thank you for that, Mr. Roscoe. Is there any discussion? Okay, Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mrs. Ern?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes. Okay, as we talked about with public comment, we have a phone system that will accept phone calls. Was a little bit short this time. It will be the full 3 minutes as of next month. We will play those in accordance with our board policies about public comment. Mr. Parkinson, is there anyone tonight?
I believe there's just one person.
Just one. Okay. Ms. McKinney, could you play that for us?
My name is Christine Corbacero, and I'm a resident at 2719 Prom Center Road, Willoughby Hills, Ohio, calling representing the Willoughby South High Parent Prom Committee. We have been working to organize a prom for the senior class of 2020 and would like to get some clarity regarding the district support. On May 5th, a letter was sent out by the district stating that support would be given to the prom committee. Once this letter was issued, a group of South parents mobilized to start organizing a parent prom committee after finding out that one did not exist and a senior student was the only one planning prom. We have reached out to Mrs. Hopkins, the Rebel families, Catherine Beal, and Bill Parkinson looking for assistance regarding the necessary steps to submit invoices for the services contracted for this prom. While some of the administration named previously have provided guidance, no one is willing to assist us in getting access to these funds. Our prom is set for the original date of July 24th at the original venue. We have spoken with the venue and they have plans for social distancing in place and are fully compliant with all current COVID-19 guidelines. We have also secured necessary entertainment for the prom and can provide invoices for the associated costs. We are here today asking for the board and the superintendent to help us with getting the necessary funds allocated from the South High Class 2020 funds, line item 200-9422, which at the last board meeting showed a balance of $10,170. Having these funds will mean being able to greatly reduce the cost of tickets to the seniors. The governor has permitted groups of 300 to gather at event venues, and Dr. Acton has just released guidelines now permitting dancing. There are no regulations preventing this prom from taking place. We come to you today to plead for your speedy assistance as we've been made aware the fiscal year ends on June 30th, at which time the funds will roll over to the class of 2021. We have tried every possible avenue, working directly with Willoughby South administration, and have come to you as a last resort. We would like to request an emergency meeting with the board to discuss how we can resolve this matter and distribute the necessary funds prior to June 30th. Thank you for your time.
And the rest of the comment was sent to the board with an email. And I believe that Superintendent Thompson, you've been working on this?
Yes, Mr. President. I have spoken with a representative from actually groups from both North and South High School. As I understand, obviously South has a desire to try to continue to put a prom on. They understand they're accepting those liabilities, but we will assist them. They're going to work through me to make sure we get those purchase orders taken care of before the 30th, before the books close. So South High School should be good to go, and then North High School is taking a different route with the use of their funds, as I understand it, which is more of a plaque or some type of memorial that we can put in our memorial garden. It's talking about the class of 2020. So they're going just slightly different directions, as I understand it now. I'm not saying that it's not subject to change, but that's what I understand it to be at this point. They are non-district sponsored, but certainly we will make sure that we get them the funds that they've raised. And the funds that they've raised, they start raising them as freshmen. They deposit it over the course of 4 years into a district account. And then normally, under normal years, the advisor would be handling all the finances of this. But since we do not have an advisor do our failed levy in November, and then COVID-19 to extend matters even further, and then our delayed election in March, which ended up being in
April.
late April, very end of April. And by then we were no longer in school, so it caused a lot of confusion for sure, but we will get the funds necessary and to the right vendors out of the correct accounts.
Thank you. So that is the public comments portion of the meeting. Next, we will start with item 2A of the approval of the minutes of the May 11th meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Zern.
I make the motion to approve item 2A, approval of minutes of May 11th, 2020.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Mr. Merhart?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Merhart. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mr. Merhar?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
I abstain.
Mr. Ruskus? And Dr. Beal?
Yes. All right, the next item is the approval of the minutes of the May 29th meeting. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. President, I
Yes,
would
sir.
like to make a motion to approve item 2B.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Mr. Jones?
I'd like to second that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion about those minutes? Okay, Mr. Parkinson, call the roll.
Mr. Ruskus?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Merhar?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes. And finally, approval for the minutes of June 1st. Do I hear a motion to approve those?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Jones.
I motion to approve item 2C, approval of minutes on the June 1st, 2020 meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President, I will second.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Okay, Mr. Parkinson, can you call the roll?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mr. Ruskus?
Yes.
Mr. Merhar?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes. Next on the agenda is the treasurer's report. Mr. Parkinson.
Thank you, Dr. Beal, members of the board. The first item for your consideration is the May financial report. I will note that in the report, on page, there it is, page 9, I believe, 8, you'll see a difference in state funding of $1,664,000. That is due to the state cut that the state implemented this fiscal year. They cut us by 10.12%. So that is going to bring down our funding for line A in the funding formula to below $15 million. Moving forward into next fiscal year, which is reflective in my May 5-year forecast, I just carry that amount over. So we're down to, let's call it $15 million this year. We're going to stay even at $15 million next year. So this will be reflective. This is reflective of the cut. As I indicated to the board earlier, I'm going to have to write checks back to the Ohio Department of Education to make up for this deficit because the funding formula, the net amount, I do not have sufficient funds for the state just to automatically take the money. So I have to write a check. And because the cut is so deep, I also have to write checks to both the SERS retirement system and the STRS retirement system. So there are going to be 9 checks that I write between the end of May and the end of the fiscal year. 3 checks to ODE, and then 3 checks each to SERS and STRS to make up for this $1.6 million.
Bill, that 15 million in the second year,
Mhm.
is that reflective of an additional 10% cut in state funding?
I'm just going to assume that the cut that the state applied this year remains in place for all of next fiscal year. There's talk, there's a House Bill or Senate Bill 319 that's pending in the Senate committee that potentially could cap the cut at 6%, but we're at June 8th, and the House, from what I understand, wants to go home for the summer. So I don't know if that's going to become law. That would get us, I think, $80,000 back, because the difference between the 10% cut and the 6. So I don't know where that stands. I'm right now, based on my information, I don't think the state is not going to cut our funds, meaning we're not going to get restored back to where we were. I think that's going to be held in place until sales tax, income tax, and all the revenue for the state come back. Just know for the June meeting, because I have to zero out the budget accounts to match actual, that particular difference is going to go away, because I have to match. But I wanted to point this out in my financial report for May, so that the board and the public can see we are going to absorb a pretty substantial cut in state funding for this school district. $3.2 million over 2 years. It's substantial. Item B for your consideration are the amended appropriations for the month of May. That can be found under item B. Item C, amended certificate of estimated resources. This is for the county auditor's office. Next, for the board's consideration, this requires a separate vote. This is the tax budget for the Willoughby-Eastlake Public Library. Since they are not a taxing agency, we present the documents for the board's consideration. This is not reflective of school district finances. We're completely independent of the library system. We're not their fiscal agent. We don't keep the books. This is just something they have to do as a matter of law.
And that does require a separate vote. So do I hear a motion to pass Resolution 3D, Willoughby-Eastlake Public Library 2021 budget request?
Mr. President,
Mr. Merhart.
I'll make a motion to pass, item 3D.
Thank you, Mr. Merhart. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President, I will second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Parkinson, you call the roll.
Mr. Merhar?
Yes.
Mr. Raskus?
Yes.
Mrs. Aaron?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Beal, members of the board. The next item for your consideration are purchase orders and blanket certificates. There are a number of blanket purchase orders that exceed $50,000 for your consideration. These purchase orders are for the upcoming fiscal year. Board policy states that anything over $50,000 come before you for your consideration. Most of these are related to utilities. We put these in for the year. This is the business office's best estimate as to what the utilities might look like for the fiscal year. And as we move throughout the fiscal year, these purchase orders get adjusted to reflect actual energy usage. Medical mutual life insurance. And the last one, the oil company, that is for the fuel for our buses. So this assumes that we're going to operate on a normal school year, but obviously if we begin the new school year virtually, most of this, a lot of this purchase order is not going to be used. We're going to save a quarter's worth of fuel, for example. But I thought probably better to just have it in place just in case. We're not obligated to pay the full $350, so it doesn't obligate the school board to anything. The next item for your consideration are the permanent appropriations for fiscal 21. So this is the budget for the upcoming school year. I will point out that the general fund revenues and the general fund expenditures match the May 5-year forecast, with the exception of the student wellness funds. So the expenditures in the fiscal 21 budget are higher by $791,000 than the 5-year forecast. In the 5-year forecast, I could just put minus 791 and call it a day. But with the appropriations going down to detailed account levels, I thought best to just keep the $791,000 in there And then as the new year gets closer, Mr. Thompson and his cabinet can decide where in the budget exactly they'd like to apply the student wellness funds and subtract out from general fund appropriations and move over into Fund 467, which is the wellness fund, and apply those expenditures there. So there's, the board can save $791,000 in expenses. But I didn't want to make that decision all on my own, particularly given my circumstances. So just so you know, Mr. Thompson, there's $791,000 that you can save in the appropriations. The other expense that I did not make any decisions on are the CARES Act funding. We have $800,000 in CARES Act money that is exclusive to the school district. There's about $80,000 that we have to, were funded to us, but we're the fiscal agent for non-public schools, so we have to remit that back to non-public schools, so I don't count that. It's just basically an in and out. But the CARES Act, there's a broad range of expenses that the Board of Education can spend that money on. Food service deficits, hotspots, I know we spend a ton of cash on hotspots, technology-related items. There's a myriad of things that is allowable for those expenses, and it's an additional $800,000 in savings that the Board of Education can save in next year's budget. So you have almost $1.6 million that you can back out of your expenses for next year and apply toward basically your savings. The other thing I'll point out with the fiscal 21 appropriations is the looming deficit I'm estimating for January 2021. Because we're ending this year on a thin cash balance, and the fact that potentially our tax collections are going to be lower starting next calendar year, the deficit I estimate is right around $900,000, but I don't want to do, or I should say recommend a cash flow borrowing of $1 million because that cuts it way too close. My recommendation is to go after a cash flow borrowing of about $3 to $4 million to give yourself plenty of cushion. So if you run into busted water pipes and leaky roofs, or you need to replace a maintenance truck, or whatever the case may be, there's cushion built into that cash flow borrowing that you can do it. If you cut it too razor thin, one little tiny hiccup in your finances and you've already borrowed the money, now you're kind of stuck. So I recommend doing about $3 to $4 million. The next person who comes in can go through the state of Ohio, potentially save money and interest costs, can go to U.S. Bank, which is our current banker. They would probably be happy to help. And as a backup plan to both of those is go to the county auditor and get an advance, which both require a board resolution, but the advance from the county, the risk is you go to the county and say, I need $4 million. The county comes back and says, oh, sorry, board, I only have $2 million. So you don't want to be in that position. But it's always a good plan B. You have plan B. So my recommendation as you guys get into the fall, you get into August, you get into September, Mr. Thompson, I could put you in touch with Mr. Priscilla, who we work with the bonds, and then he'll help walk you and the new person, or even Donna, through the process. It's very easy. But my recommendation is probably as you get to the fall, wrap that up, get your $3 or $4 million, hold it, and then when you get your final settlement in March, you just repay U.S. Bank or whatever bank you borrow from, or the state of Ohio if that's an option.
Is there an interest charge to take a cash advance from Lake County?
There's no interest charge. There will be an interest charge if you do a cash flow borrowing from either the state or a bank. But again, the risk going to the county auditor is not having the funds, the county not having the funds. They haven't, because the property tax.
They're suffering the same circumstances we are.
Yeah.
Is there any way to know?
You could ask, but when you ask, it's already, you're into December or maybe deep in December. That's the risk. I'd feel more comfortable if you did it August, September, that you lock it down, it's in the fall, you're locked down, you know for sure you've got the money, you're good to go. But, so that's the other thing with the permanent appropriations. All the other funds, I copied all the activity funds the budgets that they had this year. I just copied them into this year. So as the fiscal '21 progresses, what you're going to see on the board agenda are amendments to those student activity accounts. As either they revise what they want to do more things, or whatever they need to do, those will get revised. State grants are in there, but those are subject to final state approval. So what I always do for all my budgets is I estimate what the state and federal grants would be, and then the state comes back to the school district or all school districts and say, this is your final amount. So in a future agenda, probably August, probably September, somewhere in there, you'll see a final amount from ODE saying these are the amounts that you'll be allocated for your federal grants. So don't get concerned when you do that. That's a routine annual item that we do with the Ohio Department of Education. We put the budgets in there so we can get things going, but we have to wait for final approval. But at the same time, we don't want to stop any processes that are in place. So everything else is in the budget. It's fairly routine. There's nothing outstanding or extraordinary in there. I've included the 10.43% increase in medical insurance as recommended by our consultants, which is lower than the 11% that we had guessed for next fiscal year. So that basically encompasses your appropriations for next year. The medical mutual renewal, item G, this is an annual item. Our plan year for our medical insurance matches our fiscal year, so this will begin effective July 1. Again, this includes the 10.43%. It also establishes what are called COBRA rates. So because we're self-insured, we have to convert that to a fully insured equivalent monthly premium, and those are reflected in COBRA rates, so those are established with this. And then once I sign all the documents, the plan year continues and the benefits continue and the claims processed as normal. Item H. I'm sorry.
With item G, we are going to have a separate vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So do I hear a motion to pass item 3G, medical mutual renewal?
Mr. President?
Yes, Mrs. Lynn.
I make the motion to approve item 3G, medical mutual renewal.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. Do I hear a second?
President.
Mr. Jones?
I second the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion? Okay, Mr. Ferguson?
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Merhar?
I'll abstain.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
And Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Beal, members of the board. Next item for your consideration, which is also a separate vote, is the renewal of the Employee Benefit Administration Services Agreement. I would like to point out that this is not an impact on the general fund. This is paid for out of the self-insurance fund. This is a $40,000 contract. This price has not changed since 2013. So it's been flat and will continue to be flat. The other piece that will come up, which is will be later in the board calendar year, is basically the benefit administration side. So employees call DS Benefit with questions, they call with concerns, any issues. That's a $35,000 contract. That's not a general fund expense, that's a self-insurance expense. So that will be coming to you for review at a future meeting. But this one here is $40,000. Again, a self-insurance fund expense, not a general fund expense.
Again, that would take a separate vote. So do I hear a motion to pass item 3H, renewal of the Employee Benefit Administration Services Agreement?
Mr. President?
Yes,
I make
Mr.
a motion to approve item 3H.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
I
Jones?
second that motion.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson?
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mrs. Merhar? Mr. Merhar, I am sorry.
I abstain.
Dr. Beal?
Or not.
Yes.
Good Lord. Great. Now I'm fired. Okay. Item I for the board's consideration our student activity purpose goals, proposed budget and revisions for the current fiscal year. You'll note that all of these are revised for the fiscal year, and these have been revised to be reflective of the fact that there have been no activities in these accounts since basically mid-March. So basically what my office is doing is we're preparing to close the books, and this is one of the steps in the process, is to align the budgets with actual activity. And the last item for the board's consideration, item J, gifts and donations. The United Way generously donated $5,000 to the RSVP program for PPE. This is a federal grant, so we marked that donation in that particular account. And those conclude my reports, Dr. Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. First item for consideration is the Willoughby-Eastlake Public Library trustee. And again, we simply serve as the instrument or tool for which they, through public law, are required to do in terms of building and replacing books. And that's the why column.
Okay, so that is item 5A, Willoughby-Eastlake Public Library trustee recommendation. Do I hear a motion to pass that resolution?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Murphy.
I make a motion to adopt, resolution 5A?
Thank you, Mr. Murhar. Is there a second?
Mr. President, I second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson?
Mr. Murhar?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Raskus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item B for your consideration is a change to UniFirst uniform and MOP service, and I do want to highlight that this is the work of our folks trying to find ways to get quality uniforms and materials and supplies, and yet do it in the most economical way possible. This will save us roughly $4,000, and while that certainly doesn't solve our need to borrow $3 million in August, it does help. Every little bit helps. So their quality, we feel like their quality uniforms and materials and supplies, and it'll come in at a savings for us. Additionally, we have a Corona clause, which you'll see consistent in many of the contracts that we're going to discuss. And the Corona clause basically says, if for some reason we're not in school due to the coronavirus or any other natural disaster or disease, pandemic, that we're not obligated to make those fulfill that contract in its entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Do I hear a motion to pass Resolution 5B, UniFirst Uniform and MOP Service?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Zern?
I make the motion to approve item 5B, UniFirst uniform and MOP service.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Mr. Jones?
I second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Parkinson?
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhar?
Yes.
Mr. Raskus?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item C for your consideration is a resolution to remove 2 barn structures on district property. We full well know that for some people in the community, this is a hot button issue. But we have been cited by the city of Willoughby for the state of disrepair that they're in. We priced those out. The first larger barn is approximately $50,000 to repair, and the second barn that's behind it, and again, we're not talking about all the barn structures. Some of the barn structures we have re-roofed, repainted. We're not talking about those. The 2 that are in the greatest state of disrepair are the 2 that we are considering. And the second one is $40,000, so we're into $90,000, and that estimate is based on no structural or foundation damage, which is highly unlikely. So, and we haven't used these structures or barns for a couple of years, so they serve no purpose for us. And at this point, it would be very difficult to recommend to the board to sink $100,000 or $150,000 into structures that we don't need. at this point. So while I understand the angst of some folks in the community, there are also wood barns that are beyond their life expectancy.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. So we've heard the recommendation from the superintendent to pass Resolution 5C to remove 2 barn structures on district property. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Ross.
I will make a motion to approve item 5C.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President.
Mr. Jones?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
How many additional barns?
We would have about 3 smaller structures, 1 very large structure that's actually the closest to South High School in the back that we re-roofed. That was our maintenance, or not maintenance building, but our warehouse, served as our warehouse for a number of years. But it's great storage, it's heated, it's plumbed, and there still is where the building right behind the Little Red Schoolhouse, that entire structure remains in place, and then the greenhouse also remains in place. So it's the 2 larger structures towards the front where the old central office used to be.
Is there any kind of looking maybe to meet with people in the community to kind of let them know, or I know with our social distancing kind of hard, but kind of, I'm not sure how many people are viewing this right now, just so we can provide that good information as to why, the city cited us for the condition of those buildings, what it would cost to repair, and what the district would use it for or not use it for, so the usefulness to the district, and how our district's changed educationally, and how it was used in the past, just to kind of give community members some information that we're just not being careless and hapless and, tearing down something that they've come to see or come to understand being there. It's coming because it's gonna cost money to repair. We're not gonna use it for educational purposes or housing equipment. It's not gonna serve us in a way that it might have served us in the past.
One thing I could do is put it out as a check-in with Sue, so I could do a video update and explain it. I could do that, which we could push out through social media, if you feel like that'd make a difference. I think it would be pretty difficult to have a meeting in the community at this point.
And my understanding is we are looking to try to salvage some of the wood and auction it or give it.
The wood will be salvaged.
Because that could be something neat we could do with the community. Because there's no huge rush on when we get it auctioned. We can get that kind of all put together and then kind of have a meeting once things calm down, and people can start meeting face to face again sometime.
Was there any interest maybe from the Historical Society to
Yeah.
We tried to find a barn, the barn restores, that come in and dismantle them and then rebuild them.
Yeah.
But we didn't find anybody who was interested in the rebuild. And partially it's in large part because, especially the first main barn has a huge, when I say massive hole in the roof for, I don't really know how many years. And so it's dry rotted. The big beams, that would be the real quant. Yeah, and they're dry rotting, and it's obviously impacted the foundation of the building, and to the point where that first one's not even really safe.
Not at all.
So there wasn't the interest we had hoped.
Sure. No, that's fair. Thank you.
What was the original use for that barn? Like, when the district kind of got that property, what was the original use for that barn, or those 2 barns?
Well, I'm not sure. I can only take you back 9 years, but during the 9 years, that first big barn, until the roof gave way, which was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe somewhere in that range, it stored props from musicals and it stored vehicles, and it stored lawnmowers. So it was used until it was no longer usable. So I think it hasn't really been used for anything for several years now.
And we have ample storage now, I mean, space without it.
We're good on storage at this point with our new construction, and it's just really not the use for it, and the biggest part is hard for me to recommend to you all to invest however much money that it would take for aesthetics or for
Sure.
historical value, and as hard as that is for some folks to understand. But we did invest in the other barns to get those up to speed because they were repairable
Okay.
and still useful.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, Mr. Parkinson?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Mr. Merhar?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes. Mrs. Thomas?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Item E for your consideration is student breakfast and lunch prices for 2021 school year. We are predicating this based on, of course, us being back in school and having hot lunches is what this is based upon. Every year, food service has lost money, and while we don't expect to make a profit off our food service program, we want to minimize or reduce the impact of our losses or minimize those. So we are requesting to increase lunches by 10 cents.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to pass item 5D, food service renewal contract with Chartwells for the 2020-2021 school year?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
I will make a motion to approve item 5D.
Thank you, Mr. Roskus. Is there a second?
Mr. President,
Mr. Merhart?
I'll second the motion.
Is there any discussion? So this also has a COVID
That's what I was going to say.
agreement?
Well, you know what? I went one ahead of you.
Yeah.
I went one ahead of you. So
Ah.
that explanation
Oh, yeah.
I just gave you, check that. Can you erase that, please, Mr. Technology?
I'll public record.
5D is the food service renewal contract, and I read 5E, so my apologies. 5E is renewing food service contract with Chartwells, who has done well for us, and there is a coronavirus clause in this as well that would allow us, should we not, it's even if we should reduce our lunches that we serve due to in and out, online, back in school, or some hybrid model, regardless of what that would be, if we do not serve a certain number of lunches, there's a trigger in the contract that will reduce our fees to Chartwells for their services. That is item 5D.
And I think because of the
We should
misunderstanding, let's go ahead and have a motion once again to approve 5D.
Mr. President,
Mr.
I
Roskus?
will make a
Thank you.
motion to approve item 5D.
And a second?
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Zhang. Thank you, just to be sure everything's there. Okay, and any discussion? Great, Mr. Parkinson?
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes. Okay, Mr. Thompson, 5E.
5E. This is your 10-cent increase on lunches and breakfast, again, for the same reasons mentioned previously.
Do I hear a motion to pass Resolution 5E?
Mr. President,
Mr. Merhart?
I'll make a motion to pass 5E.
Thank you, Mr. Merhart. Is there a second?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Zern?
I will second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion for 5E? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item F for your consideration is a COVID-19 waiver of liability and indemnification This is fancy words for saying a student waiver to participate in athletics. As you know, the governor has opened up the beginnings of athletics. We are in phase 1. Our athletes are not indoors at this time. They are strictly outdoors in groups of 10 and rotating, and each athletic team has presented a comprehensive plan, which we have approved through phase 1. When we move into phase 2, then it's an upgraded plan, and there's more requirements, more stringent requirements, but access to more things like weight rooms and locker rooms. So what we called our attorney, we called our insurance company, and we've been advised to have our student athletes sign a waiver, and that's what this is.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Do we hear a motion to pass Resolution 5F, COVID-19 waiver of liability and indemnification?
Mr. President?
That's part of the consent.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. That's part of the consent agenda.
Yes. Item G for your consideration is the 2020-2021 co-curricular fees. There is an increase in fees that we had talked about, I think, since last August, that this would be part of our financial recovery plan. We are still consistent, if not lower than most of the schools around us. But generally, the increase on average is about $25 per sport for high school athletics, $20 for middle school athletics. There still is a sliding scale for students on free and reduced lunch, but all parties, to include students on free and reduced lunch, saw an increase in our pay to participate fees. And then item H for your consideration is a parent-guardian transportation agreement. This is just a reimbursement for a parent who was transporting their student in lieu of us busing. And then additionally, item I is the personnel agenda. All these folks that appear in the personnel agenda have been vetted and will have to go through the Ohio Department of Education, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, prior to becoming full employees within the scope of the district. There's a lot in this. Just for your edification, there are the reductions in force. You'll see 24 teachers' names. You'll see one administrator's name, and you'll see 2 teacher resignations. Those positions are not filled. They're left empty. But it is not 24 total or 26 total in teachers. It is 32 total in teachers, because we've had other retirements previous to this, or resignations previous to this board meeting, and those positions are not being filled, along with a second administrative position that is also not being filled. So in totality, it is 32 teachers and 2 administrators that are ripped across the district in an effort to take this levy and stretch this levy as long as we can. Some of these numbers are also predicated on declining enrollment as well. And I think that's important to note, that even if we were in the best of economic times, there would have been still some reductions in force simply because we were overstaffed. There's also an important person in there that was alluded to earlier, Mr. Parkinson. And I am sad to see Mr. Parkinson go. When Mr. Parkinson came here, there was, I believe, 17 pages of audit citations.
28.
He'll probably say 37, but I think it was 17. But there was a lot of work to be done. He was able to really, in about 2 years, go from those 17 pages to no citations at all, to winning awards within the time span he's been here, which is 8 years. So I've worked mostly with Mr. Parkinson. I wish you the very best as you move forward.
Thank you.
In your new endeavor.
Thank you.
Okay, this will take a separate vote for the personnel agenda. Item 5I. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. President.
Mr. Roskus?
I would like to make a motion to approve item 5I.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? Thank you, Mr. Jones. As part of the discussion, I would personally like to thank Mr. Parkinson for all of his hard work for our district. He helped align all the records that we have with the state requirements. Again, winning Auditor of State awards, including this past fiscal year, and the oversight of our finances that so far are still on budget for the construction. And I'd like to really applaud all your hard work, and we'll miss you.
Thank you, Dr. B. I certainly appreciate your comments and the board's support over these many, many years. And I will greatly miss working with people in the district and in this office in particular, and wish you guys nothing but the best of success moving forward.
Thank you. Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, Mr. Parkinson?
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhar?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
And Dr. Beal.
Yes. Okay, next item is the meeting notification for our next meeting, which is scheduled for July 13th, 2020 at 7 o'clock here on the first floor of the Willoughby-Eastlake Board of Education at 35353 Curtis Boulevard in Eastlake. And the next item after that is the adoption of our consent calendar. So do I hear a motion to pass Resolution 7A, adoption of consent calendar?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Zern.
I make the motion to adopt the consent calendar, adoption of the consent calendar.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. Do I hear a second? Mr. Murhar?
President, I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Murhar. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson?
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mr. Murhar?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Dr. Beal.
Yes. Now, we will adjourn to executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official. Do I hear a motion to adjourn to that executive session?
Mr. President,
Mr. Murhar?
I make a motion to adjourn to executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Murhar. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President.
Mr. Jones?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Parkinson?
Mr. Murhar?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Dr. Beal.
Yes. So we will adjourn to executive session.